Ladies and gentlemen, silence is not always golden. Sometimes it is a heavy chain that binds those who are already struggling. Today, I stand before you with a simple yet profound truth. Your silence could be the reason someone suffers in darkness. Imagine a boy, a man, a father, a brother, someone you know. He walks with a smile, but his heart is heavy. He laughs, but his soul is in pain. Society has taught him to be strong, to suppress his tears, to bear his burdens alone. And so he stays silent. But what happens when everyone else stays silent too? Depression, anxiety, abuse, and emotional distress do not discriminate. Men too suffer, yet they are often told to man up, to hide their struggles, to keep their pain to themselves. But if we turn away, if we choose not to ask, not to listen, not to care, we become part of the problem. The longer we ignore the signs, the more he suffers. The longer we dismiss his pain, the deeper his wounds become. The longer we refuse to speak up, the greater the risk of losing him, not just to loneliness or despair, but sometimes to the ultimate silence, death. So I ask you today, will you be the voice that breaks this silence? Will you be the one who asks, are you okay? Will you remind him that vulnerability is not weakness, but a mark of courage? Silence can be harmful in more ways than we often realize. It is not just the absence of words, but also the absence of action, concern, and awareness. When we choose to stay silent in the face of someone suffering, we unknowingly contribute to their isolation. Many people who struggle internally do not always have the strength to voice their pain. They may drop subtle hints, hoping that someone will notice. But when no one does, they retreat further into their struggles. This isolation creates a dangerous cycle where pain is bottled up, emotions remain unexpressed, and the weight of unspoken thoughts grows heavier each day. When someone is suffering, whether mentally, emotionally, or even physically, silence can reinforce their belief that no one cares. Imagine a man battling depression, stress, or an overwhelming sense of failure. He may not speak up because he fears being judged or dismissed. The people around him, either unaware or hesitant to pry, choose not to address his visible distress. Each day, as he wakes up to a world that does not acknowledge his struggles, he begins to believe that his suffering is insignificant, that his pain is something he must endure alone. Silence also allows dangerous misconceptions to thrive. In many cultures and societies, men are expected to be strong, resilient, and self-sufficient. Expressions of sadness, vulnerability, or emotional pain are often seen as signs of weakness rather than as natural human experiences. When no one challenges these harmful stereotypes, they continue to suppress those who need help the most. A man who has been taught to suppress his emotions will think twice before asking for help, fearing ridicule or rejection. If the people around him do not actively encourage open conversations, he may convince himself that speaking up is not an option. Furthermore, silence can delay or prevent intervention. Many mental health conditions worsen over time if they are not acknowledged and treated. What starts as stress or anxiety can escalate into severe depression or suicidal thoughts if left unaddressed. A simple, caring conversation could be the difference between someone seeking help or sinking deeper into their struggles. But if no one reaches out, the suffering continues unchecked. The longer this cycle persists, the harder it becomes for the individual to break free from their pain, and in some cases, it may even lead to irreversible consequences. Breaking the silence does not always require grand gestures. It can start with a simple question, are you okay? Or a willingness to listen without judgment. When we actively engage with those around us and pay attention to their well-being, we can recognize the signs of distress before they escalate. Being silent may seem like the easier choice, but it often comes at a heavy cost. The longer we ignore someone's pain, the more they suffer in silence, and sometimes silence can be the very thing that pushes them past the point of return. Men suffer too, just like anyone else, yet their struggles are often overlooked, dismissed, or misunderstood. Society has long painted a picture of men as strong, unshakable figures who must always be in control of their emotions and circumstances. This expectation creates an invisible barrier that prevents many men from expressing their pain even when they are deeply struggling. Whether it is depression, anxiety, financial stress, work pressure, relationship struggles, or past trauma, men experience emotional and mental hardships just as intensely as women do. However, they are less likely to seek help due to the stigma attached to male vulnerability. Many men grow up hearing phrases like "boys don't cry," "man up," or "be strong." These statements, often said casually, send a deeper message that expressing emotions is unacceptable, that asking for help is weak, and that they must deal with their pain in silence. Over time, this conditioning makes it difficult for men to open up about their struggles, even when they desperately need support. They may feel isolated, as though no one would understand their pain, or worse, that no one cared. When they do try to talk, they may be met with responses that further discourage them, such as being told that others have it worse, or that they should simply tough it out. This cycle of suppression and invalidation can lead to severe mental health consequences, including chronic stress, depression, substance abuse, and even suicidal thoughts. The reality is that men do suffer, and their pain is just as real as anyone else's. But because they are conditioned to hide their emotions, their suffering often remains unseen. Unlike physical wounds, emotional wounds are invisible, making it easy for people to assume that everything is fine when in reality it is not. A man can appear successful, confident, and strong on the outside while battling overwhelming sadness or anxiety on the inside. His struggles may not be obvious, but they are real, and ignoring them does not make them disappear. When society refuses to acknowledge that men too experience deep emotional pain, it isolates them further, reinforcing the false belief that they are alone in their struggles. Ignoring the signs can be dangerous, as unresolved mental health issues can lead to severe and sometimes irreversible consequences. Many men who suffer in silence do so because they feel that no one will take them seriously, or worse, that their pain does not matter. They may try to drop hints, withdrawing from social circles, losing interest in things they once enjoyed, or showing signs of stress and exhaustion. These warning signs are often overlooked or misinterpreted as simply being in a bad mood or just having a tough time. But when no one pays attention and no one steps in, their suffering intensifies. Depression and anxiety do not go away on their own. The longer they are ignored, the more deeply they take root, making it even harder for the person to seek help. A man who feels unheard and unseen may resort to unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as substance abuse, reckless behavior, or isolating himself from those who care about him. In the worst cases, prolonged silence and neglect can lead to self-harm or suicide. Studies show that men die by suicide at higher rates than women, not because they experience more pain, but because they are less likely to receive the support they need. When their struggles go unnoticed, when no one asks how they are doing, when no one encourages them to talk, they may feel that they have no way out. The cost of ignoring the signs is too high. When we fail to acknowledge someone's suffering, we unknowingly push them further into isolation. It is not enough to assume that someone will ask for help when they need it. Often, they won't. It is our responsibility to recognize the signs, to check in on those around us, and to let them know that they do not have to suffer alone. A small act of concern, a conversation, or even just letting someone know that their emotions are valid can make a world of difference. But when we stay silent, when we ignore the signs, when we assume that men should handle their struggles alone, we risk losing them to a battle they should never have to fight in isolation. Society discourages male vulnerability, shaping the way men express or more often suppress their emotions from a very young age. Many boys grow up hearing that crying is a sign of weakness, that expressing sadness is something only girls do, and that a real man handles his problems without complaining. These seemingly harmless lessons instill a deep-seated fear of vulnerability in men, teaching them that showing emotions makes them appear fragile, less masculine, or incapable. This social conditioning does not just affect childhood. It follows men into adulthood, shaping their relationships, their mental health, and their ability to seek help when they need it most. A man who has been taught that vulnerability is unacceptable will hesitate to open up, even to those closest to him. He may feel emotions like sadness, frustration, loneliness, or fear, but instead of expressing them, he bottles them up, putting on a strong front. This emotional suppression can lead to feelings of isolation, where even in a crowded room, he may feel completely alone because he believes no one would truly understand his struggles. Instead of confiding in a friend, partner, or family member, he may distract himself with work, hobbies, or unhealthy coping mechanisms like alcohol or substance use. This does not make the pain go away, it only buries it deeper, making it harder to address in the future. The pressure to appear strong at all times also affects how men handle difficult situations. If a man is struggling with stress, anxiety, or depression, he may feel ashamed to acknowledge it, fearing that others will see him as weak or incapable. In a workplace setting, he may push himself beyond his limits, refusing to take breaks or ask for help, which can lead to burnout. In relationships, he may struggle to communicate his emotions, leading to misunderstandings, emotional distance, or even the breakdown of meaningful connections. In extreme cases, this inability to express emotions can escalate into anger or aggression, as some men channel their suppressed feelings into outbursts rather than vulnerability. Ignoring the problem does not make it go away. The longer men are discouraged from being vulnerable, the more damage it does to their mental health. When society continuously sends the message that men should always be strong, tough, and self-sufficient, it creates an environment where they feel trapped, unable to seek support even when they desperately need it. This is why so many men suffer in silence, convinced that asking for help is not an option. They may fear being judged, ridiculed, or even abandoned if they dare to break the mold of traditional masculinity. But the truth is, vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a sign of strength. The ability to acknowledge pain, to express emotions, and to seek support when needed should be encouraged, not shamed. Ignoring the signs can be dangerous, as many men who suppress their emotions for years eventually reach a breaking point. Mental health struggles do not disappear simply because they are unspoken. When emotions are continually repressed, they build up over time, leading to chronic stress, anxiety, and even depression. A man who has spent his life believing he must suffer alone may begin to lose hope, convincing himself that no one would care even if he did speak up. This isolation can be incredibly dangerous, as loneliness and despair are some of the leading contributors to suicide. When no one notices his struggles, when no one asks if he is okay, he may start to believe that his pain is invisible, that his life does not matter, or that there is no way out. Depression in men often presents differently than it does in women. Instead of showing obvious signs of sadness, men may become withdrawn, irritable, or overly focused on work or distractions. They may struggle with sudden mood swings, unexplained anger, or reckless behavior. In many cases, these signs are dismissed as personality changes or simply being stressed out, rather than recognizing them as cries for help. Society's failure to recognize these warning signs only reinforces the belief that men must endure their struggles alone. When their pain is continually overlooked, their suffering deepens, and without intervention, the consequences can be devastating. Speaking up can make a difference. One of the most powerful ways to combat this cycle of silence is through open and honest conversations. A single conversation can be life-changing. It can remind someone that they are not alone, that their struggles are valid, and that support is available. Too often, people assume that men will reach out when they need help, but the reality is that many will not. This is why it is crucial to check in on the men in our lives, to ask questions, to truly listen, and to create a safe space where vulnerability is accepted rather than discouraged. It is not enough to wait for someone to speak up. Many men have spent their entire lives being told to stay silent, and breaking that habit requires encouragement. A simple, "How are you really feeling?" or "You don't have to go through this alone," can be enough to open a door to an important conversation. More importantly, those conversations need to be met with understanding, not judgment. When a man does open up, he needs to feel heard, supported, and reassured that his emotions are valid. By fostering an environment where vulnerability is encouraged rather than shamed, we can begin to break the toxic cycle that forces so many men to suffer in silence. Every action counts, no matter how small. Whether it is offering a listening ear, showing empathy, or simply reminding someone that they matter, each effort contributes to creating a culture where men feel safe to express their emotions. Too many lives have been lost because of silence, because men were too afraid to speak, and because the people around them did not take the time to listen. Speaking up is not just about saving one life. It is about changing an entire mindset, one conversation at a time. Ignoring the signs can be dangerous. Yet this is something that happens all too often. People assume that if someone is truly struggling, they will say something, ask for help, or show obvious signs of distress. But the reality is that many men do not openly express their pain. Their struggles often manifest in subtle ways: changes in behavior, withdrawal from social activities, loss of interest in things they once loved, increased irritability, or an overall sense of exhaustion. These signs may seem small at first, but over time they build up and indicate something much deeper. The problem is that most people do not recognize these warning signs until it is too late. Instead of seeing these shifts as cries for help, they are often dismissed as moodiness, stress, or just having a rough time. This lack of awareness and understanding allows the suffering to continue, sometimes with devastating consequences. When someone is battling mental health challenges like depression or anxiety, their mind often becomes a battlefield. Every day is a struggle, filled with feelings of emptiness, hopelessness, or overwhelming sadness. But because they have been conditioned to believe that showing vulnerability is a weakness, many men hide these struggles behind a mask of normalcy. They go to work, laugh with friends, and carry on as if everything is fine. The people around them see what they want them to see: a man who appears strong, composed, and in control, but beneath the surface, he may be barely holding on. The more he suppresses his pain, the heavier it becomes, until eventually it reaches a breaking point. The danger of ignoring these signs is that it often leads to more destructive behaviors. When men feel that they cannot talk about their emotions, they may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms: excessive drinking, reckless behavior, or substance abuse. Some may immerse themselves in work, using it as a distraction to avoid dealing with their emotions. Others may distance themselves from loved ones, convinced that no one would understand or that their pain is a burden to those around them. In the most extreme cases, the silence can lead to self-harm or suicide. Many men who take their own lives never openly express their suffering. Their pain was hidden behind forced smiles and casual conversations, making it all the more difficult for those around them to see the severity of their struggles. One of the biggest reasons why these warning signs go unnoticed is because society has normalized the idea that men should always be strong and independent. Even when a man shows clear signs of distress, people may hesitate to address it, fearing that it would be intrusive or that he may not want to talk. But the truth is, ignoring these signs does far more harm than good. A simple conversation, a moment of genuine concern, or even just letting someone know they are not alone can make all the difference. It is not enough to assume that someone will reach out if they need help. Many men will not, simply because they have been taught that they shouldn't. This is why it is crucial to pay attention, to check in on the men in our lives and to recognize that even those who seem the strongest may be fighting battles we cannot see. Speaking up can make a difference, yet so many people hesitate to do so. There is often a fear of saying the wrong thing, of overstepping boundaries, or of making the situation worse. But silence is far more dangerous than any imperfect words. A simple question like, "Are you okay?" or "Is there something on your mind?" can be the opening someone needs to finally share what they have been holding inside. Many men feel that no one truly cares about their struggles, that their pain is invisible. But when someone takes the time to check in, to listen without judgment, it can break down the walls that have been built over years of emotional suppression. Speaking up is not just about encouraging men to talk. It is about creating a culture where they feel safe doing so. Too often, when men do open up, they are met with dismissive responses like, "You'll be fine, just be strong," or "Other people have it worse." These statements, even when well-intended, only reinforce the belief that their emotions are not valid. This is why it is so important to listen with empathy and without judgment. Sometimes the most powerful thing one can do is simply be there, to listen, to acknowledge their pain, and to remind them that they are not alone. Encouraging openness is key, but it requires effort from everyone. It is not enough to tell men to speak up if they are struggling. The world must also be willing to listen. This means breaking the outdated stereotypes that discourage emotional expression in men. It means normalizing conversations about mental health, making it clear that seeking help is not a sign of weakness, but a step toward healing. Schools, workplaces, and communities must all take part in this change, ensuring that mental health resources are accessible and that men feel comfortable using them. When men feel safe to express their emotions, they are less likely to suffer in silence. But this change will not happen overnight. It requires ongoing effort, conversations, and a shift in cultural norms. It means showing up for the men in our lives, letting them know that their feelings matter, and proving through our actions that they do not have to carry their burdens alone. Small steps, like checking in regularly, being patient, and offering support without pressure, can go a long way in making a difference. The longer we stay silent, the more men will continue to suffer needlessly. It is time to change that. Silence allows pain to grow in the shadows, and the longer someone suffers without support, the harder it becomes for them to reach out. Many men struggle in silence, not because they want to, but because they feel they have no other choice. From a young age, they are taught to be strong, to push through their problems, and to avoid showing emotions. They internalize the idea that vulnerability is a weakness. And as a result, they develop a habit of suppressing their feelings rather than expressing them. This habit follows them into adulthood, where they face increasing pressures, work, relationships, financial responsibilities, and personal expectations. As these burdens grow heavier, so does the weight of unspoken emotions. But because they have spent years hiding their struggles, asking for help feels foreign, even impossible. The danger of staying silent is that it creates an emotional prison, where negative thoughts and emotions spiral out of control. When a man feels like he has no one to turn to, he is left alone with his fears, doubts, and insecurities. Over time, these emotions can build into something much more destructive: chronic stress, depression, and in some cases, even suicidal thoughts. What makes this even more dangerous is that many men do not outwardly show the signs of their suffering. Unlike the stereotype of someone struggling with depression, isolated, visibly sad, or withdrawn, many men continue their daily routines, going to work, interacting with family, and appearing fine on the outside. They might even joke and laugh with friends, all while carrying an unbearable weight within them. One of the biggest reasons men stay silent is because they fear judgment. The world has conditioned them to believe that expressing emotions makes them weak or less capable. This fear of being seen as weak is so deeply ingrained that even in moments of extreme distress, many men will choose to suffer alone rather than risk being judged. They might downplay their struggles, convince themselves that their pain is not important, or assume that no one would understand even if they did speak up. In reality, this belief only deepens their suffering. Human beings are not meant to carry pain alone. Connection, support, and understanding are essential to healing. But when men are made to believe that they cannot seek help without being shamed, they continue to bottle up their emotions, pushing themselves further into isolation. Another consequence of staying silent is that it damages relationships. Emotional suppression does not only affect the person struggling, it also impacts the people around them. When a man refuses to express his emotions, his loved ones may sense that something is wrong, but feel powerless to help. Friends and family may notice changes, less engagement in conversations, sudden mood swings, or an increasing reluctance to participate in activities. But without clear communication, they are left guessing. This lack of openness can create emotional distance in relationships, leading to misunderstandings, frustration, and even resentment. Partners may feel shut out. Friends may assume he does not want to talk, and family members may believe that everything is fine when it is not. In reality, he may want nothing more than to be understood, but because he has been conditioned to remain silent, he cannot bring himself to share what he is going through. When men do not express their emotions in healthy ways, those emotions often find other outlets, many of which are harmful. Suppressed emotions do not simply disappear, they manifest in different ways, sometimes through anger, frustration, or reckless behavior. A man who is struggling with deep emotional pain may become easily irritated, lash out at loved ones, or engage in risky activities as a way to cope. In some cases, he may turn to substances like alcohol or drugs to numb the pain. These coping mechanisms provide temporary relief, but they do not address the root problem. Instead, they create a cycle where the pain is continuously masked rather than healed, leading to long-term consequences for both mental and physical health. The longer a man stays silent, the more he convinces himself that his suffering is something he must endure alone. He may tell himself that he does not want to be a burden, that no one would understand, or that speaking up will not change anything. But these thoughts are a trap, one that keeps him stuck in a cycle of loneliness and pain. The truth is, support is available, and there are people who care. The challenge is breaking through the mental barriers that prevent men from seeking help. Encouraging conversations, creating safe spaces for vulnerability, and challenging outdated beliefs about masculinity are all crucial in making sure men do not continue suffering in silence. It is not enough to assume that someone will reach out when they need help. Too often, men will not. That is why it is important for those around them to take the initiative, to check in, to ask how they are really doing, and to be willing to listen without judgment. A simple, genuine conversation can be the difference between someone continuing to suffer alone and someone finally finding the courage to open up. It is time to break the silence, because the longer we stay silent, the more he suffers. Breaking the silence is not just about words. It is about creating an environment where men feel safe to express themselves without fear of judgment or ridicule. Too often, the expectation of strength and emotional control leaves men feeling like they have no space to be vulnerable. They are taught to be problem solvers, providers, and protectors, roles that emphasize action and solutions rather than emotional expression. As a result, when men do struggle emotionally, they feel lost, unsure of how to communicate their pain or even whether they are allowed to express it at all. This leads to a damaging cycle where emotional struggles are buried rather than addressed, and the suffering grows in silence. The silence surrounding men's mental health is not just personal, it is deeply ingrained in society. Cultural expectations reinforce the idea that men should not complain, should not break down, and should not show weakness. From childhood, boys are told to toughen up when they cry, to be strong when they are hurt, and to figure it out when they face challenges. These messages shape the way they deal with emotions for the rest of their lives. Instead of seeing emotions as a natural part of the human experience, many men begin to associate them with failure. When faced with depression, anxiety, or personal struggles, they may convince themselves that they should be able to handle everything on their own. Even when the pain becomes overwhelming, they remain silent, fearing that speaking up would make them appear incapable. This fear of being perceived as weak prevents many men from seeking professional help. Therapy and counseling are valuable resources, yet many men avoid them because they worry about how it will be seen by others. They may feel ashamed for needing help, believing that real strength means handling problems alone. In reality, the strongest thing anyone can do is acknowledge when they need support and take steps to get it. However, as long as society continues to send the message that men must be self-reliant at all costs, many will continue to suffer rather than reach out. The stigma surrounding men's mental health not only discourages them from seeking help, but it also creates a sense of isolation, making them feel like they are the only ones struggling when, in truth, they are not alone. One of the biggest dangers of prolonged silence is the toll it takes on both mental and physical health. Studies have shown that men who suppress their emotions are more likely to experience high levels of stress, which can lead to serious health problems such as high blood pressure, heart disease, and weakened immune function. Mental health struggles that go unaddressed can also contribute to substance abuse, sleep disorders, and chronic fatigue. The body and mind are deeply connected, and when emotional pain is ignored, it manifests in physical ways. The longer a man keeps his struggles to himself, the more his overall health deteriorates, making recovery even more difficult. In addition to personal suffering, the silence surrounding men's mental health has a ripple effect on families, friendships, and communities. When a man is struggling internally but does not express it, his relationships often suffer. He may withdraw from loved ones, become distant, or struggle to communicate effectively. Partners may feel shut out, friends may notice a change in behavior, and family members may feel helpless not knowing how to support him. Without open conversations about emotions, misunderstandings and conflicts arise, creating emotional barriers between people who care about each other. Many men want to connect with those around them, but years of emotional suppression make it difficult to do so. The more men are encouraged to open up, the more meaningful and fulfilling their relationships can become. The cycle of silence will continue unless deliberate steps are taken to change it. This requires a shift in the way society views masculinity and emotional expression. Encouraging men to speak up is only part of the solution. The other part is ensuring that when they do, they are met with understanding and support rather than judgment. It is important for friends, family members, and communities to foster an environment where men feel comfortable expressing themselves without fear of being dismissed. Acknowledging the reality of men's mental health struggles, providing resources, and normalizing conversations about emotions can make a profound difference. It is time to break the silence, because every moment of silence allows suffering to continue unchecked. Breaking the silence is not just an individual responsibility. It is a collective effort that requires society to change the way it views masculinity, vulnerability, and emotional expression. For too long, men have been conditioned to believe that speaking about their emotions is a sign of weakness, leading to a culture of silence that continues to harm them. The burden of unspoken pain can weigh heavily on the mind and body, creating a cycle where suffering is endured rather than addressed. Many men carry this weight alone, believing that they must figure things out without support. But the truth is, no one should have to suffer in silence. Every person deserves the opportunity to express their emotions, seek help, and receive the support they need without fear of judgment or ridicule. One of the biggest obstacles preventing men from opening up is the fear of vulnerability. Society has long equated vulnerability with weakness, especially for men. They are expected to be strong, capable, and in control at all times. These unrealistic expectations make it difficult for men to admit when they are struggling. Instead of acknowledging their pain, they may try to suppress it, believing that doing so will make them stronger. But true strength is not found in silence. It is found in the courage to speak up, to ask for help, and to acknowledge that no one is immune to hardship. The more men are encouraged to embrace their emotions rather than hide them, the healthier and more fulfilled they will be. Silence does not just affect the individual. It affects families, friendships, and entire communities. When men feel that they cannot express themselves, their relationships suffer. Emotional suppression creates distance between partners, causing misunderstandings and resentment. It strains friendships, making it harder for men to connect with those who care about them. It impacts families as children grow up without seeing healthy emotional expression modeled for them. When men do not speak about their struggles, their loved ones are left in the dark, unable to offer the support they desperately need. Breaking the silence is not just about helping men. It is about creating healthier, more connected communities where people can support one another without fear or shame. Another consequence of silence is that it limits personal growth and healing. When emotions are suppressed, they do not simply disappear. They build up over time, leading to increased stress, anxiety, and even physical health problems. Many men who suffer in silence experience chronic headaches, fatigue, high blood pressure, and other stress health issues. Emotional pain that is left unspoken often manifests physically, making it even more difficult to cope. Without healthy outlets for expression, men may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms such as substance abuse, excessive work, or reckless behavior to escape their pain. But these temporary solutions do not address the root of the problem. They only prolong the suffering. By breaking the silence and acknowledging their struggles, men can begin the process of healing and find healthier ways to cope with their emotions. One of the most damaging myths about mental health is that seeking help is a sign of failure. Many men believe that asking for help means they are weak or incapable. This belief prevents them from reaching out to professionals, support groups, or even close friends and family members. In reality, seeking help is one of the bravest things a person can do. It takes strength to admit that something is wrong and to take the necessary steps toward healing. Mental health professionals, counselors, and support groups exist to provide guidance and support, yet many men hesitate to use these resources out of fear of being judged. This stigma must be broken so that men feel empowered to seek help without shame or hesitation. Creating a culture of openness starts with normalizing conversations about mental health. It means challenging outdated stereotypes that discourage men from expressing their emotions. It means encouraging boys and young men to talk about their feelings rather than teaching them to suppress them. It means creating safe spaces where men can be vulnerable without fear of criticism. Schools, workplaces, and communities all play a role in this transformation. When mental health discussions become as common as physical health discussions, men will feel more comfortable seeking the help they need. Ultimately, silence is the enemy of healing. The longer someone remains silent, the more they suffer. But when one person speaks up, it can inspire others to do the same. A simple conversation, a moment of honesty, or an act of kindness can make a world of difference. Every person has the power to break the cycle of silence, to encourage openness, and to let the men in their lives know that they are not alone. No one should have to carry their pain in isolation. The sooner we recognize this, the sooner we can create a world where every man feels safe to speak, to heal, and to be truly seen. It is time to break the silence. The longer we stay silent, the more he suffers. Every man deserves to be heard, understood, and supported without fear of judgment. No one should have to carry their pain alone, believing that silence is the only option. By creating a world where vulnerability is met with compassion instead of criticism, we can change lives and even save them. So let's start today Let's check in on the men in our lives. Encourage open conversations and remind them that asking for help is not a weakness, but a sign of strength. Let's challenge outdated beliefs, stand up against the stigma, and make it known that true strength comes from honesty, connection, and the courage to speak up. Because when we break the silence, we give someone the chance to heal, to find hope, and to know that they are never alone.